Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Stronger, Safer, Healthier Strategies for Championing and Revitalizing Workplace, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you could join us. My name is Michelle Wilcox and I will be your moderator today. And I will be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL with you as a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio, your devices do. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, please watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, and then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation and your questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout. And the presenter will be answering questions at the end. Lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan website. In addition, we offer a mandatory preventing sexual harassment training on June 11th, 2024. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Stronger, Safer, Healthier Strategies for Championing and Revitalizing Workplace. Our presenter today is Steve Thompson. Let me turn this over to you while I give you a little bit of history. Steve integrates a holistic approach to workplace safety. For the past 20 years, he has been actively consulting, teaching, and coaching safety, ergonomics, and risk management. He has served in various capacities, including risk manager, safety and health manager, and business development coach and facilitator. He's a co-author of Workplace Safety, a guide for small and mid-sized companies, and is co-author of both safety and ergonomics chapters in Foundation for Optimal Productivity and Tools of the Trade. Earlier in his career, Steve served as an Air Force, as a medic, and later worked as an emergency room nurse. In addition to his role at Aspen Management Group, he is involved with several charitable causes, including the Insurance Industry Charitable Foundation, which is referenced as the IICF. Thank you for being with us today, Steve, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Good to be here, and it's good to be with everybody. I'll just come on camera for a moment so that you can actually put a face with the speaker. This system allows us today, with all of the modern technology, we're able to see, we can't see all of you though, that's the bummer. You can only get a chance to see me. So I'm gonna mute myself out of the photo for a moment and just carry on with our presentation, and I'll come on if there's any descriptions I need to make with my hands or otherwise, but I look forward to participating today. So I wanna welcome you to all of you are distinguished guests and ergonomic enthusiasts. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. Today, we hope to unravel some of the mysteries of revitalizing workplace ergonomics. We're going to cover a lot in the 1 hour or less, but we're going to have a couple of questions for you, and we're going to set the stage for this ergonomic extravaganza. And first off, what I'd like you to do is give us a little bit of information. We're going to run a polling question. And Michelle, would you like to run the first polling question? We'd like to know how your ergonomic knowledge is. So if you can just go ahead and run that first polling question, that would be great.
Yeah, so are you an awesome expert, average, could use some improvement, not much of it all, early stages, or not sure? And we thank you guys for your participation. Everybody's click on the button this morning. So I'm gonna wait until
that's it. Heffernan webinars, they've got a great audience, so it's great. I know that they're very good about voting. I mean, look at this, almost 80% already done.
Yeah, so it looks like
demons.
33% are average, 33 not much at all, early stages, 27 could use some improvement, and 6% not sure.
Can you show that on the screen so everybody can see it?
Um,
We just need to close it and then share.
there we go. Sorry about
And then
that.
share. No, that's okay. And just share. Hit the share button. There we go. Everybody gets to see it now. So, and I get to see it too. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Michelle. Let's keep moving on. Thank you. All right. We're going to keep moving. So we're going to cover 4 topics today. It's going to be fairly easy to get through our session. We're going to talk about ergonomics, what it is, how to revitalize or just start off a program if you don't have one. We're going to cover all areas of ergonomics. How to sell ergonomics. You know, we're going to look at the various techniques that can be used. If you're in an organization, how do you advance that forward? And then we'll talk about culture and what that means and how that really, you know, becomes part of your organization. All right, Michelle, we're going to go ahead and launch the second polling question, if you wouldn't mind.
How would you rate your ergonomic program? Excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor?
Great. I love everybody so fast on the draw here.
Yes.
And just sort of rate your current ergonomics program. This can be your office ergo program. This can be your industrial program. This can be anything that you have to deal with, you know, material handling, ergonomics, anything at all that involves any of that. That would be a great, great to you to share with us.
So I think I clicked the button a little bit too soon, so I don't believe everybody got to. I'm sorry.
You did. You went way too soon. We got quick on the draw there.
So I did. So I don't think we only had 36% vote. So it looks like 47% say good, but unfortunately 24% say poor, which is kind of discerning.
Yeah, well, we'll take care of that. By the time everybody's done today, you'll either be in the excellent or the very good category. All right. All right, thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and hide that now. Thank you very much. What is ergonomics? Usually, if we were in a live audience, we'd say, well, what is it? You know, what exactly is ergonomics? And it's a fundamental, it attempts to fit the task to the person. It adjusts the way the work is being done. I ought to know this because I wrote it in a book about attempts to fitting the task to the person. And that's my definition and pretty much the way that most ergonomists see it. All right, let's move on to the next slide. 4,500 years ago, it was thought that when the pyramids were built that maybe some people believed that aliens from another planet participated in it. But it doesn't matter whether you believe that or not, you're an ancient alien follower or not. At the end of the day, the term ergonomics means work and laws. So it essentially means the laws of work, and that's kind of cool. The history of ergonomics in the United States really goes back to 1850s, and then many of you may have read The Jungle book from the 1906. Written about the goings-on in many of the modern factories and industrial cities, including the chicken slaughtering environments. And we learned a lot about ergonomics in that particular time. And then, of course, the military took it on in helping us, exit from airplanes, i.e. the emergency exit when a parachute would go out for a pilot. And then in the 80s, we had the office ergonomics. And today, reality is it's 24/7, isn't it? It's all over the place. There's 5 elements to analyzing ergonomics, and these are what it looks like here. Obviously, these steps include looking at your history. Have you had any material handling or ergonomic or repetitive motion or any incidents like that? Do you have any trends that are developing? What about the work practices and the type of work that people do? You know, culture has a factor in this too, whereas you have you can see some work environments where no one gets hurt, and then you can have others where a lot of people get hurt or otherwise. And then how do you focus on areas that might need some attention? There are some individual injury factors relating to musculoskeletal injuries, and we have, this could be smoking and vaping. Some people that smoke or vape, if they have a pre-existing area of concern like their back or shoulders or otherwise, vaping and smoking has nicotine, and it's thought that that can reduce the oxygen flow to certain areas of the body. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that means like people are just built differently. Like if you put your arms down at the side of your body right now with the palms facing forward, does your arm bend out slightly or does it go straight down? Well, everybody's different, so we can't, do the same analysis for each person when everybody is a little bit different. We have to be very specific. All right, we have another polling question, Michelle. So can we get to that one and then just maybe let it go to 75%?
Yes, I'm sorry about that, folks.
That's okay.
Okay, so the next question is, what type of employees do you have at your company?
And you
Office
can check all of them, like if I believe, yes, I think you can check more than one on this. No, maybe not. Sorry, people.
Yeah, I'm
What's
not
your
sure about.
predominant? Yes, you can check more than one. So if you
Oh,
have office and you have retail or otherwise, so I believe you can check as many as you want.
great. I'm gonna wait until it's about 75% this time.
Thank you.
Okay.
All
Okay,
right.
it looks like 78%
Have some
say
office folks, right? You can share
office,
that. You can close it and share it. There we go. And then share.
and then 45% government, nonprofit, health or social services, 26 industrial manufacturing, 11 retail or hospitality, and 13 other.
Okay, thank you. All right, you can hide that and then I'll keep moving on. Well, when we're going to assess ergonomics, we're going to look at work practices and we're going to look at culture. And let's get some creative thoughts going here. So for those of you that have a question box, you're more than likely, and Michelle, if you want to mute yourself, that'd be great. If we have you can all see what's going on here. He's bent over at the waist, probably not doing it the best job, but there is a better way to lift, of course, and this is demonstration, but where are the knee pads? I mean, this guy needs to have some knee pads on, right? Again, for those of you that have some industrial environments, you know that. And take a look at other tools that people use. You can see on the right-hand side where that's a short tool, and you can see the pressure in the palm. But then on the right-hand side, you see you use a larger tool, perhaps to get a little bit better leverage. I would say that to even get better leverage on that tool, you'd want to hold it further back. But again, it's an example of, of leverage. And then what about the lifting alternatives? If you have to lift something heavy off the ground, it just doesn't have to be a straight lift. Here's a way, this is a 90-pound or 60-pound bag of concrete. How would you lift that up? Well, there are different techniques for that. This is the 5-step lifting process. I'm not going to go into details on them. We're just kind of reviewing this kind of quickly so that everybody has a chance to see some different examples. So you see a guy struggling here, pulling this wire through the wall, and realizing, wow, there might be some other ways to do it. I could have a mechanical device pull the wire through, or I could even use a tool that I could use as leverage to be able to do that. Again, carrying a large 4x8 sheet of plywood or other boards, you can see that there is a 3-step lift to this. And, it's not always just that. Now, this tends to be if you can use 2 people, great, but, a lot of job sites, you just really can't. Shoveling, for those of you that might have staff or if you've done some shoveling yourself, you can see that in this photo on the left-hand side where it's totally, swiveling the body, and then using a more ergonomic approach to doing the shoveling in the right 2 pictures. Again, just a chance to see what that looks like. And then, of course, the old reaching. Many of you may have been reaching to do something. This doesn't have to be just using a tool. It could be doing anything where you're reaching, just extended to put those dishes away in the top shelf without getting the step stool out. And you know what can happen from that. Of course, a buddy system, making modifications where you can use a buddy system or teamwork to be able to lift, of course, more common. Again, we have someone that's demonstrating a couple of different ways to do this particular task. One is a bent over, one is slightly kneel down, and the other is in a squatting position. The squatting position and the kneel down is fine. We need some knee pads, of course, for that. And then the tools that are used today to analyze the way we lift, I mean, we have all sorts of software and applications that can be used to actually look at the different types of way that we lift and move things and can determine, what might be more effective for a particular individual. Again, we see some more interactions here about doing things when we're bent over or stooping, and then other ways to do the task that might relieve it. Doesn't mean you wouldn't bend over and stoop sometimes, again, you just don't want it to be all the time, and you don't want it to be the common practice. You want to be able to practice ergonomics. We come to the office now, and 77% of you have people working in this environment. Well, I know no one on this call does any of these things in this photo. I know that as a fact because Heffernan clients and folks that are related to Heffernan, they don't look at their devices this way. But if you know somebody that might use their device this way, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Do we have any modern thinkers? You know, when Rodin put together the modern thinker on the left-hand side, we now have a whole new way of being modern thinkers, and you can see that. This might be okay for a few seconds to look at an email, but it's not something we want to do on an ongoing long-term basis. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because we used to be able to just go into a work environment, look at somebody's setup, but now we have to think about other things, right? We have to think about the things that happen away from work. And you know, if you're an office person and use your phone to check an email or do texting to a client or to an associate or otherwise, it's all part of the second part, which is a sedentary lifestyle, which we've really moved into in the last 30 years. And there's been an impact, of course. Part of it involves sedentary workforce. Office work can be ignored because it doesn't appear to be high hazard like all those construction, all an industrial work we talked about before. But the reality is we've had an explosion of remote work, gaming, all of that. And if you take a look at the age breakdown of gamers in the US, I mean, 58% of Americans play video games. And now the average American home owns at least one dedicated game console. But you can see the ages here that are, you know, that have this, and it's a pretty high number. And this is generally a sedentary task. We only point this out because associated with, you know, with all the work environment comes our off time, and we've got to be very conscientious about that also. We've had, of course, this melding of work and non-work. If you're carrying a phone or a tablet or a computer around, it typically means that you can be doing work at any time of the day, even on vacation. And so this whole melding of work and non-work has been going on. And remember, if you're an employer, you're probably liable for injuries that occur at home or remotely. You know, there used to be the saying that, well, put some files in your car, and therefore, as long as you have those files in your car, you know, you're covered under workers' comp, blah, blah, blah. But today, everybody's got the phone, and if they can show they've done any work on that phone relating to work, then anything that occurs, even if they're, quote, off the clock, could still be considered work-related because of that. So it's really a 24/7 global economy, and we mean that literally. And the lines get real blurred between what's work and non-work today. So we have to be well aware of that. All right, we have another polling question for you. Michelle, if you can launch the one about do ergonomic interventions work?
Yes, no, maybe, or not sure. And we had one participant that said that she needs to work on her posture. And I completely agree. Looking at those pictures, I am.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to ask about posture in a few moments. So this particular question, let's see where people come in on. You got to choose one on this one, unfortunately. Do ergonomic interventions work? And an ergonomic intervention could be changing some of the things we saw earlier, or it could be something you do at work. All right, looks like we got a good voting population. We close that and then share it.
Hold on, son. I'm sorry. Manage. Oh, there we go.
And then share it with our audience.
76% say yes, 18 no, and 7 not sure.
Okay, great. We're going to talk about this over the next couple of minutes, and thank you for that, Michelle. All right, so the question is, do ergonomic interventions work? And you're going to see ergonomic intervention programs. You can see it there. I'm going to label that as EIP as we go on throughout the session. So just know that ergonomic intervention programs means that, you know, we actually are talking about any kind of intervention. And we'll talk about some of these categories to see what they actually can do. And for those of you that said yes or no or not sure or otherwise, there are ways, of course, that your gut can tell you, yes, it probably works, or not sure. Or for those of you that the 76% were yes, probably something in your gut says, well, if we do something, something will change. You go back to the Hawthorne studies where it's like, if you do something for people, that things can change no matter what it is. And then is there any research that says, is there any targeted research that's been done that show that certain things like training or assessments or otherwise, that they actually work? Well, let's talk about that. Here's the problem with a lot of the surveys and the research that's been done in ergonomics. Unfortunately, they are generally, there's studies typically are sponsored by furniture companies and others. So you might be looking at a study that says, oh, this keyboard is much better than all the other keyboards. And we did a study that shows that people work more effectively and they get less injuries by using a particular keyboard. Well, I would venture to say that that's very difficult to study and probably not true, because you have conflicts of interest. So generally speaking, you'll have studies with small numbers of participants. So it'll say something like the next category, which is, well, we had 46,000 employees that participated in this study. However, only 900 of them made it to the end of the study. Well, did we really study 46,000 or only 900 that made it to the end of the study? We have to be very careful about these studies. And then many studies show relating to animal studies, and they don't match up very well to humans. I want to share two studies with you so that you have them, but I'm going to show you some of the gaps that exist. Now, this is a return to work study. This is 2 years to find out with people with low back pain could return to work sooner with certain interventions. That would be an assessment, training, and some tool changes or workstation changes. And the reality is, this study showed that after 2 years, that people, when they had this relatively small intervention, ergonomic intervention, that they had fewer days away from work, meaning that they had 206 days versus 311. So you would say that, wow, this 2-year study shows that it's effective, and that if we do a few of these minor things, we can probably reduce the time frame that people are out for their injuries relating to low back pain. Well, here's the unfortunate part. We don't know if the workforce was essentially static during this period of time, and we don't know if there were changes in the work, what people did they come back to work in different jobs? We don't know all the details, so we can't say that it's definitive, but we can say that it may be effective. And I like those odds in this particular case, because there's a few other knowledge banks out there that show that assessments, training, and workstation changes can impact the way people work, including with productivity. Now, here's another 2-year study that they wanted to study whether or not interventions led to a reduction in the number of incidents. And let's just take a look at this. So here's what they did. Over 6 months, they engaged leadership and management on training about ergonomics, much like we're going through today, like what it does, how it works, et cetera, et cetera. And then they had safety committees at the company, or a group of supervisors, maybe if you don't have a committee, which is fine, you're not required to have one. And they went through a 2-day workshop learning about ergonomics, how to do assessments, how to go through the facility and look for ergonomic problems. And then for the next 18 months, after they went through and did this checklist, they went through and made changes. So they might, raise a table, or they might adjust a keyboard, or they might do whatever. And on the chart on the right, you can see where they had XYZ 430 cases before these interventions. And then after this intervention study over the 18 months, they only had 295 incidents. And you could see broken out by the body regions, either neck, shoulders, elbows, etc. And so we don't know, again, if the workforce was static or consistent, because it doesn't say so in the study, but we can make a little bit of a leap and an assumption that ergonomic interventions of some sort can make a difference. And in this particular case, we can see that. Well, there are other interventions that can be done, and rather than go through all of these with you, I did want to share with you a couple of highlights. So I've listed up to 14 interventions that you can use for various job types. And if you do side jobs, or you know people, your significant other, or others in your family do jobs, this might be something to provide them. By the way, this handout will be available to everyone in about 48 hours after the presentation or sooner. But take a look at a contractor or a laborer. You could use ergonomic hand tools. You could use proper lifting and carrying techniques training, or anti-vibration gloves, or even ergonomic power tools. So there are some things that can be done in certain areas. Maybe you have landscapers that work in your organization. You can see that there are special tools for them. There's lifting and carrying. There's clothing that can be worn in a different environment. You know, heat illness is also ergonomics. I mean, it's just a different way to look at it. Or ergonomic backpacks or carriers for certain equipment, which I'm sure all of you have seen, which can lighten the load. In agriculture, you can certainly use mechanical harvesting equipment, proper tool maintenance, making sure tools are sharp and things of that nature. There's posture that can be trained also. If you have a factory or a warehouse, there's all sorts of things that can be applied here also, including things like anti-fatigue mats. Let's say you're standing for long periods of time, even at a computer workstation, you probably want to have some carpet or some anti-fatigue mat that can work to prevent, you know, longer term injuries. And I'll discuss that a little bit later in the work environment and how that works. You can rotate tasks in a factory so that if you're working on one side of the line, you may transfer to the other side of the line, or actually do a completely different job so that the work is different, so that the body isn't being, used in the same way for repetitive motion. I think a lot of companies have people that drive, and if you drive for long periods of time, you know, what kind of seating? They make pads for seating. They have, making sure that people take regular breaks, and they have stretching programs. There's a whole bunch of things that relate to ergonomics here, and I just wanted to cover a few of the big ones. When it comes to more of an industrial setting, you can see things like lifting aids. You can have little hoists. You can have things that can help lift things. Want to have training programs on how to, lift safely with your back, or move with items, or do a buddy lift or otherwise. And of course, stretching and warm-up programs. And we're going to include with this session a great stretching and exercise program from the Marines. No, you don't have to be a Marine to use the program, but we do have a great one that we're going to send to you. And then in construction, you can see all sorts of things like tool belts. You know, we see this in the police force when you carry around a heavy tool belt, or cable operators or others. You know, there are ways that can make that tool belt lighter by wearing one that maybe has a set of shoulder straps, sort of like a backpack that helps support it. There are knee pads, vibration dampening tools, like they have jackhammers today that actually has some anti-vibration in it. Also, how to lift and move things, similar to what we talked about in the industrial setting. So those are some examples. I wanted to give you at least 14 of them for every industry, so you had them in your back pocket and can use them. And you can modify, obviously, some of them, but these are the types of interventions that you can use when you have people in different work environments. All right, design of vehicles could also come into place, and that's obviously a factor, whereas, it could be just the way getting ladders off of a vehicle. I know that we've worked with clients in the past where it's like, okay, we've got these ladders in the back of the vehicle or strapped on. How do we get them down safely? And these days, they make devices where they can just be lowered very easily without the same strain and sprain that goes on. We have another polling question, and I'd love to hear from you to hear what you have to say about it. And Michelle, you're more than welcome to open up our next polling question.
So what methods have you used to sell safety or ergonomics?
That's
Data-driven
right.
return on investment, compliance, assurance, regulatory requirements, ethical responsibility and/or employee well-being, company reputation, or other.
And I may have messed it. Well, I don't know if I messed this up. I think you can choose, if you've tried multiple methods to try to sell safety or sell ergonomics. We're just looking for the types of methodologies that you've used to try and sell safety or otherwise. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So
Yes,
we
we've
can
got
close that out.
59%.
Okay, we can close that out and then share it with the audience. That's
So it
great.
looks majority are ethical responsibility. So is that bad or good?
Well, it's all meaning that the thing that I like to see is 80% of you have used an ethical responsibility and employee well-being. You're basically saying, hey, it's the right thing to do. And that's great to sell it that way. And we'll go through that in a moment. You can go ahead and hide that, and we'll come back to this presentation. Thank you, Michelle. So when you're selling ergonomics, if you're selling it to your CFO, CEO, or others, and they tend to be more accounting in nature, then you may want to use an ROI focus or a data-driven approach. And I want to be able to provide you with those methodologies. Of course, you could use the compliance pieces like, hey, if we don't do this, we're going to have some compliance issues. Like we're in California, we need an ergo standard. We're in Minnesota, we need an ergo standard. We're in Washington, we really should have some standards in place. So wherever you might be and dealing with different aspects of compliance, something to think about. So we'll go through some of these. There are really 8 ways to do it, and you can see some of them might be, merged into the same category. But let's talk about a data-driven approach first, and what that sort of looks like. And that data-driven approach, could be graphical representation. Hey, we've had a lot of injuries relating to, multiple parts, and they happen to be, relating to mechanical movement or otherwise. And so therefore it becomes, driven by data. More data here is, well, 40% of our work comp costs are musculoskeletal injuries. Again, driving the data forward. There have been studies done on different, where 10,000 employees were looked at, and when people were in discomfort, they pulled off task 5 minutes out of 15. So the point being is that there was, once interventions were made, there was a decrease in reported discomfort and a decrease in claims reported for ergonomic injuries. Again, data-driven pieces, and again, more on data-driven that we talked about. There's a return on investment, and what I've done is I've also included a link to a cost calculator so that you can easily put in the cost of your ergonomic intervention. Let's say it's going to be a $600 assessment on an employee, and they've been complaining about their work environment, and your company says, well, we don't really want to spend $600 on an assessment. But then you plug in the $600 and you see for yourself what the return on investment is. So a return on investment could be a financial piece, and that's something that, again, becomes something that a lot of companies need to use. And in this particular case, the return on investment, there's the calculator that you can see there from Cornell. It's an actual ergonomic cost calculator. And there's also a link to a spreadsheet-like document that's a cost calculator. And you know what? You can use this for safety or ergonomics. Either way, you can plug in what would be your return on investment. And you can see that Cornell does the 1-year ROI, the 3-year, and then how long it's going to take to get the payback on that. So good stuff available if you decide to use that. The other territory that you can enter is sort of the strategic alignment. It says that, this is a big picture of how we think in an organization, such as, you can see one of the companies there that we work with, General Parts Company, that our culture is about being true to ourselves, living our value, doing the right thing for each other and our customers. We take the well-being of people. So it relates to your primary purpose, your strategic alignment, and it's just, part of your company mission to care for the safety and health of people. The compliance piece, you can simply use that as a methodology, right? Saying that, oh my gosh, if we don't do these things, we're going to get in trouble and we're going to have problems if we don't do it. And certainly there's a lot of examples out there with repetitive motion injuries and other things where, OSHA has come out or other regulatory bodies and have been an issue in California for its Cal OSHA, et cetera. Then we come down to the ethical responsibility and and the employee well-being that we talked about earlier, and what that actually means. And that's a process where it's about just doing the right thing. It's the moral, legal, and ethical approach to dealing with that. And that's an emphasis that on safety, that it's not only legal, it's not only corporately responsible. There's an ethical responsibility that we have as an organization, as a team, as managers, as leaders. And it does tend to foster a more positive environment to do it. There are some other things that can be done, which I'll get to in a little bit, but I wanted to talk about some of the things that you could talk about as it relates to ethics. Now, this is a study that came out during COVID 2021, and it's really quite amazing. It's a simple exercise that you can do right now while you're sitting down, if you're sitting or standing, and it's basically a calf raise. And this little tiny muscle, the soleus, is like 1% of your entire body. It's just 1% of your musculature in the body, but it does some amazing things over the course of time. And the reality is that by doing a certain number of these up and down, you can do one leg at a time, two legs at a time. You could do it while you're at home on the couch. You could do it at work. Look at this, 52% less increase in blood sugar after a meal for doing the soleus push-up. Quite amazing. This little tiny muscle will add such great health to your body. So one of these things, again, that comes down to the ethical, moral responsibility, knowing that your organization is doing the right thing. It's putting things into place that are healthy for your workforce and making a difference. All right, so for those of you that are wondering, where do I tend to look at my smartphone? Do I tend to be in the blue, the light blue there, which would be perfectly neutral? Are you about 15 degrees in the sort of the dark blue, or do you tend towards the mustard, orange, or even the red version? You can kind of test yourself right now and see where you're at. But we do want to share with you that we've collected data for over 2 years, and we found that, from self-assessments, of course, I think most people are pretty honest about this because it's anonymous, that 45 degrees, 25% of the people this was about 3,000 people that we've done webinars with, and 38% at 30 degrees. We have only a few in neutral and a few at there. And I don't know about you, but when you take a look at a bale of hay or a air conditioner on your neck, you can see pretty quickly it's probably not something you want to do on a regular basis, and you want to try and find ways to go into neutral positions and neutral environments. Well, there is a best practice form, and we wanted to include that, and especially working on a cell phone or a tablet, you do want to try to take short breaks every 15 to 30 minutes. And you want to get some stretching in that you are operating in. It's just the best way to do it. And of course, do what you can to cradle. And then of course, it's always easier if you're supporting your arms, just like reading a book. If you're on a couch and you've got it on a pillow or otherwise, it certainly gives you a chance. Tablets are very difficult to manage because they're not really set up very well ergonomically, but it's something to certainly give some thought to. We'll look at that in a little bit. Now, if you have sit-stand environments, like for the office environment, there's a couple things to remember about that. So in sit-stand, everything from the waist above is exactly the same. You don't change anything from the waist above, but from the waist down, that's where you need to be thinking about what do we do for folks. Now, I'm going to show you what Cornell University says you should follow for best practices for sitting and standing, and they're the leaders in this. They have a great group of people who have been researching this, for many years. Dr. Hedge is the as the lead over there. But you can see that it sometimes makes sense to wear some sort of shoes, of course, decent shoes, not high heels per se. Use some sort of footstool that allows your foot to be elevated. Now, if any of you have ever been to a bar, you know that there's a bar rail down there, and that bar rail is not for you. It's for the barkeep because it makes you comfortable and takes the pressure off your lower back and hips, and you can alternate between the right and left foot. But let's talk about what Cornell says. The most effective way, if you're going to move between sitting and standing, is you can see here that every during the course of a day, in the course of 30-minute period, you should be sitting for 20 minutes in decent posture, 8 minutes standing, and then 2 minutes of some sort of standing, stretching, moving, or whatever. And this is sort of the best position you can get in. And we've had people say, well, I sit for 2 hours, I get tired of sitting, then I stand for 2 hours, and I get tired of standing for. Now remember, standing work can cause things like varicose veins and blood clots. So standing positionally in one spot all day long is not going to be the most effective tool. We've learned that in the industrial environment from factories where people stand on cold, hard concrete floors, all day long, and they have problems that develop from that. So this is a great, research that's been done, important to take a look at. Back in the day, probably 25 years ago, we never really looked at the outside world. We just would look at somebody's work environment and say, well, if you just fix this, this, and that, you'll be okay. Unfortunately, the off-work time is greater than the time we spend at work. And so if somebody has a hobby, they're crocheting, they're playing guitar, they play the piano, they are a mechanic on the weekends, they do other tasks that, involve grip and other types of things. Well, you've got to apply the same techniques when you're at work or away from work. And we've included a little checklist and helpful for that. And what I'd like you to do right now is go to number H, where it says hang the arm straight down. By the way, this was done before ChatGPT or AI. We created this on our own before artificial intelligence. We came up with this little acronym for ErgoChamp. We want all of you to leave this call as an ErgoChamp. But look at number H, and I'd like you to do this for 10 seconds. Just put your hands down at your side. I know you're working on your computer and stuff right now. Just let your hands down at your side and just let them hang there for 10 seconds. That's all. Just hang for 10 seconds. And I'd like to give that some thought about doing on an hourly basis. Even if you can't stretch, you can't move, you can't get around. Now, doesn't that feel good? That's just 10 seconds. Think about what 60 seconds will do. So now we talk a little bit about, some of the things that can be done to actually advance ergonomics in the organization. And certainly there's a few steps to making that happen. There's education and awareness, which we talked about. There's engaging the right stakeholders, whether it's senior management or it's HR or others. It's the sharing of success stories when someone has a successful piece, and then it's how do you get different people to be involved and participate in the program? How do you build this culture of ergonomic well-being? I mean, how do you do it? I'm going to give you 10 culture change strategies, and you can use these for ergonomics, you can use them for safety, you can use them in all sorts of environments, but I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about that. So there's modern technology that can be part of culture, and there's peer-to-peer observations, whereas you just simply have your employees making peer-to-peer observations and walking through a facility and seeing the things that they see as problematic. There's camera observations now that can tie into your security systems or your internal cameras, and they can do a couple things. One is they can look at general safety, but they can also look at body postures, how people are moving and lifting things. And it's not like you're trying to catch people doing things wrong. What you're trying to do is look for trends or otherwise where there might be a lifting process or a forklift that's going through an open door or a freezer door that stays open for long periods of time, all ways to help you improve the organization. So it's important that, there are some things there's modern technology, and there's leading and lagging indicators. The leading indicators are these that we're talking about. The lagging indicators are things like a loss run or historical data as to what's going on, what's happening. So there are 4 areas that help build a culture. Of course, culture is built upon what we call caring. And when you have caring involved, in an organization, it's where people look out for the safety and welfare of others. And Scott Geller talked about this years ago in the actively caring techniques that he recommended for organizations. And that is, you're driving down the road, you live in a small town, you kind of know your small town, maybe 1,000 people or less, and you see somebody broken down on the road. Now you could drive right by them and say, wow, I care for them, I feel bad for them. You could stop and help them and say, is there anything you need? You could make a phone call to the local sheriff if necessary. There are various levels of caring. And in this particular case, you know, the actively caring, how much can you do to step in to help? There's the listening to people, which we call mindful listening, or, you know, rather than just passively hearing people say things and then forming thoughts in your mind while the other person is sharing. Listening helps build culture. Learning, and not necessarily just training, because learning is done through observation, trial and error, right? We have to make a few mistakes. It just doesn't come from one, you know, always showing the right way. That's why we show things that are problematic in some of our ergonomic environments. And then building a team. How do you get a team to work together and act in professional and appropriate ways? What really makes a great supervisor or a manager? Well, you know what? It's integrity. Integrity tends to be the number one, you know, aspect of what makes a supervisor or a manager. And this is a study of 65,000 employees, and really wanted to find out what makes the difference. And of course, you can see a good communicator. Obviously, that would be being honest and being truthful in what you say. And then a people person would be number 3. But isn't it remarkable how integrity stays at the very top there? So let's talk about some of the things that can be done to build your ergonomic culture, and how can you do that? Well, first off, I would suspect that many employees, when they're first starting on the job, that they get a handbook, an HR handbook, or maybe even they get a copy of the safety program. Well, wouldn't it be something to have 2 or 3 lines at the bottom of your handbook that says, these are the 3 things I'm going to do to remain safe on the job and ergonomically well, or these are the 3 things I'm going to do to prevent an injury. And all they do is write down 2 or 3 things on that when they sign their signature. Now, you're not doing that to go back and check on them later, like, oh, did you lift correctly every time? No, what you're asking them to do is to make a commitment, a pledge, when they're hired, on that paperwork that says, I'm going to do these things to have safety in my job. I'm going to practice taking a break every hour. When I'm driving, I'm going to make sure I wear sunscreen, or I'm going to try not to put myself in a backing, you know, that I have to back up, so that I'm pulling into spots so that I don't back up, because backing is, you know, like 72% of the incidents out there, for those of you that have that going on. Making a commitment about being ergonomically correct. This could be at the performance appraisal period time, maybe a commitment to a fellow employee that works in the department. Hey, I'm going to work very hard to be ergonomically, do this job safely. Can you check my posture? Right? You're making a commitment to someone else. You could have an ergonomic mentor program where you have a couple of senior employees that have had a good, you know, a good methodology at ergonomics, and just helping out others. And I've put a number of others on this list just to give you an idea. Recognition, workshops, a task force, feedback, you know, having even challenges in ergonomics, like having fellow employees assess other workstations. Even scorecards can be developed, and then making sure that you have a leadership that's been developed and operating well. That, my wonderful audience and my incredibly awesome Heffernan clients and associates, is a summary of revitalizing your ergonomic programs. Now, we always love to hear how we did, and we also want to hear one takeaway that you had from today's session. So I guess Michelle jumped the gun and she is already on the survey. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just keep it running. Now, we don't share this with our audience. We use this as our internal document to be able to make sure that we are working to improve and get better at what we do. So we run this survey, but then we want people to go to their question box and tell us one thing that they took away from today's session. So looks like we can close that out. We're not sharing this one, Michelle, just close it. And then, so if people can go into your chat box or your question box and just take a moment to tell us one item that you took away from today's session, just one item that you took away from today's session about revitalizing or starting your ergonomics program. So Michelle, do we have anybody that's submitting any information either in their question or their chat box?
Not yet. I think, Steve,
Okay.
for me, it was a lot of information, a lot of really good information, especially in my case, I recently relocated and now I'm working 8 hours a day remotely. And that's a big change from what I was
Yes,
doing. And
right,
so I'm going to personally take a lot of this information and see how I can integrate it into mine, because I know I'm terrible at getting up and taking breaks, and I'll be sitting there for 3 hours and then all of a sudden it's
right.
like, okay, I better stand up or I'm going to seize up.
Well,
So
we'd
I
love,
did.
yeah, we'd love to keep hearing everybody's thoughts on this, so I can see a few coming in.
So yeah, so much more
I can see
specific
that,
info. You saw that. Add safety committees to
right?
help with ergonomics.
Yeah, the calf
Yeah,
raises, that's good. I'm glad you took the soleus muscle away.
I've been
New
doing it since
study.
you said the question, or since you brought it up.
Okay. The hanging the arms by the side, that's good to see. Redoing ergonomics for cell phone, laptop usage, great that that did that. It doesn't have to be boring, right? Of course. The soleus can help lower your blood sugar, absolutely. And that's great. And about the standing techniques, yes, that's always been unique. And that is, we used to think we'd stand for many hours at a time. That's true. Thank you so much, everyone, for contributing and being a part of today's session. And Michelle, I'll let you close things out if you don't mind.
Absolutely. And we do appreciate each and one of you for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation from our website. Thank you, Steve, for your time and expertise today. We hope that all the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on February 6th for our Diversity, Inclusion, and Implicit Bias webinar. Thank you all and have a safe day. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you, Michelle, for moderating today. I appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. Thank you.